my honor to introduce Michael Rozyne, our keynote today. When the NOFA Board of Directors got together in July to ponder the conference theme, which we do every year, we have a fabulous board of directors, and as per policy, NOFA Vermont has to have half of its board commercial farmers, and they're really engaged in their work, and we ask them to think about what are themes that they have heard about at farmers markets, that their customers talk about, that they're thinking about when they're in the field. And we talk about these important themes in July. And so this year we asked the question, how can organic agriculture serve as the gateway to other issues in the food system? How can organic be the leverage point for addressing new issues like social justice, climate change, fair labor? How do we sing to a larger choir? The theme, Growing Outside the Box, came to represent this vision of the organic movement challenging these other issues in the food system. And there's really no better person to help us think about this than Michael Rozyne. Michael's the founder of Equal Exchange and Red Tomato. His work every day is to get good food to people. And that defines NOFA's historical mission as well, which is why we started talking to each other back in 1997 about how we can work together to transform the food movement. Every time I listen to Michael, I learn new things. He challenges me, he energizes me, he entertains me, and I really he could talk about anything, and I learn new things. I'm excited that he's talking about this today. Welcome, Michael Rozyne.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Enid. When I was 20 in the summer of 1977, I spent a week with Elliot Coleman at his farm in Harborside, Maine, and was happily indoctrinated with the principles of organic soil building. Soon after, I left for a year at Cornell Ag School, where I became one of those annoying students in the back row who always had his hand up, insisting there must be some non-chemical way of solving this problem. Could you get into that? My vision for the future of farming and food at that time was all about organic. In the 35 years since then, what I now refer to as my career, my vision evolved into something bigger than organic. Along the way, I discovered a blind spot that was limiting my growth and the growth of my companies. This is the story of the events the companies started, the blind spot that challenged me so. We're going to encounter a little turbulence on this ride, so please fasten your seatbelts, turn your cell phones off. If you want to munch on some organic peanuts, that's okay. My career resembles an apple orchard, a diverse one. It's had but one theme, one crop, which has been marketing on behalf of small farmers. But there have been many varieties of that one theme. I worked on 2 vegetable farms in Maine, one organic, one conventional. I worked at the Natural Food Co-op Warehouse Northeast Cooperatives, which ended up in Brattleboro. I went on to found the fair trade coffee business, Equal Exchange, where we imported from peasant farmer cooperatives. And then in '96, I started Red Tomato. While I never veered from the path, I always had a fantasy of being an investigative journalist. I like to write. I love the movie All the President's Men, with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman as the 2 young reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, who uncovered the Watergate scandal that brought down the Nixon presidency. In the early '80s, I was a grocery buyer at Northeast Cooperatives. I purchased bulk items, including nuts and seeds. I split the annual contract I made between 2 organic farmers in the Midwest and one trading company in Fargo, North Dakota called Red River Commodities. Red River always sold at a lower price, so I began asking questions of Vice President Frank Gunkelman. Gunkelman said, quote, Our verification program is conducted in 3 parts. First, there's a grower affidavit relating to land history and cultural practices. If someone is pulling our leg, it tends to show up there. The second step is the field inspection. Every farm is visited at least once a year. The third step is residue testing. Every lot is tested except for a few small batches. I spoke with Wayne Anderson, a North Dakota grower who was growing for Red River. He had never been visited by a field inspector. His crop wasn't tested for residues. When I asked Gunkelman, he responded, "Anderson may not have been aware that our field man was there. We know where the fields are. It's laid out in the grower affidavit." I went back to Anderson. He never filled out a grower affidavit. I asked Gunkelman so many questions that he invited me to visit him in North Dakota if I ever happened to be passing by. It became clear to me it was my leg that was being pulled. I was highly suspicious. I was also thinking, maybe this is my investigative moment. I called Whole Life Times, a national health magazine based in Boston. I said, "Are you interested in a story about an organic fraud?" They were. So in November 1982, I told Gunkelman that I would happen to be passing through Fargo. Fargo was bitter cold that day in November. My reception at Red River was warm. Gunkelman was full of assurances and promises, just like he'd been on the telephone. Still, no paperwork to show me. He promised he'd send paperwork soon after. I dropped by a Red River grain elevator and spoke with a manager there who knew nothing about the segregation of organic from conventional seeds. A few weeks later, a sample did show up. Oddly, it was for red durum wheat and not sunflower seeds. I called Gunkelman. "Oh, that's the same analysis they do for the sunflower seeds." I called the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. Well, they said that the Red River audit, the analysis was legit, except for one thing. It didn't test for treflan, the most common herbicide used by sunflower growers in their state. Gunkelman said, "I don't have to test for that. We would know immediately just by looking at the fields." Yeah, right. Now I had him. Whole Life Times published my article in July 1983. 3 weeks later, Frank Gunkelman confessed the story was true. He'd been selling conventional seeds as organic, earning a higher price. It was fraud. Well, that was exhilarating. I looked in the mirror and saw Robert Redford playing Bob Woodward, but the mirror whispered back, "Don't kid yourself, man. If anything, you look more like Hoffman, the short Jewish guy." The thrill faded fast. For Frank Gunkelman in Red River, there were few consequences in 1983. A touch of public shame, a minor loss of market share. But there was no certification. There was no legal accountability. There was no easy way to level the playing field so that to make it fair for the organic farmers in the Midwest who'd been competing against River. This was very sobering. I must disclose one unexpected side benefit I received from this article, appropriate for this Valentine's Day weekend. The editor of Whole Life Times, Kimberly French, and I had never met face-to-face during our journalistic exchange. It was all by telephone. When we did meet 2 years later, we fell in love, and today live with our daughters Shia and Liza on our homestead in southeastern Massachusetts. This, however, is not the something bigger for which this story is named. Meanwhile, back at Northeast Co-ops, organic fraud aside, life was pretty good. I was 27. I had a job with a lot of responsibility, a lot of creative space. I was learning tons about consumer ownership and workplace democracy. This was a perfect laboratory for developing my ideas about business and the food industry. Soon after the article, I met folks from the European fair trade movement. In 1983, Europe had a vibrant fair trade industry. The U.S. didn't. We had fair trade handicrafts, but almost nothing in food. Three of us started a fair trade study group at Northeast and proposed that the board of directors make fair trade foods a cornerstone of the product line. But the idea was turned down. It was too unfamiliar in '83, too risky, more than the co-op could take on. Even the Vermont retail co-ops, who eventually would become some of Equal Exchange's best customers, read the business plan and gave us the feedback that it seemed unlikely that the idea of fair trade could motivate anybody to buy a food product. So three of us, Jonathan Rosenthal, Rink Dickinson, and I, all single, carefree, in our mid to late 20s, we rejected all the friendly, cautious advice we got, and we left Northeast Co-ops to start Equal Exchange. At that time, the cornerstones of my vision were organic, plus fair trade, plus workplace democracy. We at Equal Exchange made fair treatment of farmers the backbone of the business, part of every transaction. We adopted the European standards, which established a floor price for coffee. We bought only from democratically run co-ops. We provided them the credit they badly needed. And everything about the deal was transparent. When the world coffee price fell under 75 cents a pound in the late 80s and stayed there for many months, we never paid growers less than that $1.06 a pound floor price. But those were tough times. We took care of the employees with an unusual ownership structure. The three founders had almost nothing to invest, but we needed $100,000 to start the company and more to grow it. So we established an annual dividend for outside investors that would pay them 5%, and we gave them non-voting stock. Only employees had the voting stock. Though the structure was relatively unfriendly to outside investors, it was the mission that brought them in. After reaching break-even in year 3, Equal Exchange paid that 5% dividend every year except one. By the Great Recession, that 5% dividend was looking pretty good. At the start of Equal Exchange in '86, Nicaragua had no organic coffee. The Reagan administration, hostile toward the socialist Sandinista government, had embargoed Nicaraguan products from entering this country. We had to ship the green beans to Holland and have them legally transformed into a roasted product that now said product of Holland so it could enter this country legally. That did not prevent U.S. Customs from putting a quarantine on our entering product for much of the first year. By the time I left Equal Exchange in '95, we had organic coffee from cooperatives in Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Nicaragua. Most of our coffee was organic. All of it was fair trade. Today, Equal Exchange has 125 employees, and most of them are owners of the company. Annual sales are over $50 million. I'm proud of what we built at Equal Exchange, but in 1995, I wanted to try the same approach with fruits and vegetables grown right here. Was it nuts to leave a venture just as it was becoming stable and profitable? Well, those of you who know produce, and many in this audience know produce well, you know its allure. It's healthy, it's fast, it's dynamic. Circumstances, prices, the weather, everything changes every day. Success requires a Zen-like focus on just solving problems. It's all about now. And it's immensely satisfying when a whole series of just-in-time events leads you to a head of lettuce that just radiates freshness, or a peach so sweet and juicy it dribbles down your cheek. When Red Tomato entered the local produce business in '96, I told myself, this is your last act, Michael. This is your last startup. This is the one you've been waiting for. To my vision of the future of food and farming, I added local. Red Tomato's a food hub. We orchestrate a network of 45 farms in the greater Northeast, and we distribute their fruits and vegetables mostly to retail grocery stores. We don't have a warehouse or trucks of our own. Instead, we rely on growers to pack, aggregate, and deliver as much as they can. We hire independent parties to fill in the gaps, and we orchestrate all the logistics. Little did I know, in 1996, there would be explosive demand for local within 10 years. Little did I know that that very demand would create all kinds of new tensions and challenges for us in the organic world as the public tried to sort out the difference between local and organic. Time magazine in 2007, on their cover, pitted the two against one another. Little did I know how hard it would be finding local organic fruit. What I did know was that the produce industry, compared with specialty coffee, was going to be very tough. I designed, again, a mission-driven business, but this time I incorporated Red Tomato as a nonprofit. I also knew that product quality would reign supreme. If Red Tomato couldn't deliver better quality, we wouldn't survive, regardless of organic, local, or fair trade. Most startups are brutal on their founders and their first employees, and Red Tomato was no different. 12 to 15-hour days, insufficient cash, strategic assumptions that were just wrong. But it was a very creative and rewarding time. For comfort in hard times, for a trustworthy kick in the pants, for clues to the right way forward, I did as I had been doing for 20 years. I turned to Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry's been my hero since the late 70s. I've read a lot of his essays and fiction more than once. During the winter of 2006, friends and family of mine asked me, "So, what do you want to do for your 50th birthday?" Now, I have a reputation for being difficult, perhaps obtuse when it comes to parties and gifts. But one day, I just blurted out, "I know what I want. I want to meet Wendell Berry." So I hand-wrote a card introducing myself and inviting Kimberly and me down for a brief visit. In a matter of days, he wrote back, saying, "Sure, come on down. I reserve Sunday afternoons for visitors, and the Sunday before your birthday is free." The drive from Louisville and to Port Royal, Kentucky went by quickly. I was so nervous we'd be late that we arrived way early. And since there's no cafe in Port Royal to hang out in, we parked on the roadside, only to see our host drive by, kind of nodding the way country folks do. 45 minutes later, we knocked on his door. We spent a delightful couple of hours with Tanya and Wendell Berry, sipping tea on the porch, talking about people we knew in common, and touring the farm to see his fields, sheep, herding dogs, and draft horses. If anything was extraordinary about that visit, it was just how ordinary it seemed. And as we were leaving, he gave me a signed copy of his latest collection of essays, The Way of Ignorance. In an earlier essay called In Distrust of Movements, Berry writes, quote, "I have had with my friend Wes Jackson a number of useful conversations about the necessity of getting out of movements, even movements that have seemed necessary and dear to us, when they have lapsed into self-righteousness and self-betrayal, as movements seem almost invariably to do. People in movements too readily learn to deny to others the rights and privileges they demand for themselves." And he adds, "or they deal with single issues or single solutions." At first reading, I was most challenged by those words, single issue, single solution. Was my vision, which started with organic and grew to encompass fair trade, economic democracy, was that too narrow, single solution? As I returned to the essay over the years, my attention shifted to the other words, self-righteousness, self-betrayal, denying others the rights and privileges they demand for themselves. This essay and several events began moving my attention off of my vision to the way I was acting in relationship to people with whom I had differences. I was seeing them by measuring their thoughts and their work against my vision. I wasn't trying to understand things from their perspective, which meant I wasn't truly seeing them. This was a blind spot. For me, this was not an aha moment. It was the beginning of an aha decade. One of those influential events I mentioned was being accused of a betrayal. After a panel discussion at a regional food conference, a woman descended from the back rows, came up to me and said, "Why are you against cooperatives?" I heard that from someone you used to work with. The woman was calm, reasonable. As one who had lived in, worked in, shopped in cooperatives throughout most of my adult life, I was dumbstruck. At that moment, I had no way to answer her or even understand her. It puzzled me for a long time. We humans seem notoriously good at designing conflict situations. Some say we are more divided by politics and religion today than ever before. So how is it that good, intelligent people on opposite sides of an opinion stay so set in their views that they end up with gridlock and hurt feelings? It's not only Democrats and liberal Democrats and Tea Party Republicans. We see profound divisions inside groups that share lots of values in common. Recall those debates inside the National Organic Standards Board about processed food and snacks. Do they fit with organic philosophy? The debate about materials lists versus on-farm processes. The natural materials versus the synthetic debate. These were not and still are not casual disagreements. Good, intelligent people with so many values in common that end up divided and stuck. How does this happen? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The field of neuroscience offered me some answers. Jill Bolt Taylor is a neuroscientist who at age 37 experienced a massive stroke on the left side of her brain, leaving her unable to walk, talk, write, read, or even remember her life. In the ensuing 8 years, living entirely in the right side of her brain, she somehow discovered a level of inner peace that she'd never known before. After 8 years of therapy, she recovered completely. One of the insights she offers the rest of us is we are feeling persons who think, not thinking persons who feel. Well, that wasn't what I was taught. I grew up believing that reason and logic were key. My feelings were separate, automatic things. Yeah, I needed to be aware of them and occasionally to express them. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt lines up with Taylor. Haidt's central metaphor is a rider on an elephant. The rider is reason, or logic, the small part of the learning process that we actually control. The elephant is intuition and emotion, the automatic processes. They've been in charge of the human mind for thousands of years. The rider evolved to do a few useful things. It sees further out in time in the future. It helps us learn new skills and technologies. Most importantly, the rider, reason, is the spokesperson for the elephant. But the rider is servant to the elephant. The rider, reason, knows how to fabricate facts and explanations for whatever the elephant has already decided. So here's what's going on. The things that divide us are rooted in feelings and intuition. And yet, when we're in the middle of a debate and things are getting hot, you think about the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? We call up data, facts, and reason to win the day. Haidt says, nice try, but if you want to change someone's mind, you've got to talk to their elephants, their emotions. One more little critical piece, according to Haidt, that we have to understand here. When people are embedded in groups, think churches, sports teams, Girl Scouts, armies, political campaigns, when we're in communities, we are most able to get beyond our self-interest. Groupishness makes people less selfish and more loving. But groups don't only bind us together, they also blind us. In the comfort of groupishness, it gets harder to recognize truth and wisdom from outside the group. All of this helped me understand my accuser, the woman who asked me, "So why are you against cooperatives?" After racking my brain, I remembered this event at Equal Exchange. I'd gone back a few years after my departure to share with the staff there my experience at Red Tomato. The room was full of lots of new faces I'd never seen before. At Red Tomato, we often work directly with growers instead of through co-ops. It's cheaper, it's faster. And I said something like, "Well, I'm not religious about cooperatives, it's a practical matter for me." Well, working with democratically run cooperatives is one of the 4 principles of international fair trade. So for someone at that meeting that day, my view was a violation of a fair trade principle. It was morally wrong. In that binary way of seeing the world, 1, 2, black, white, I was either for or against cooperatives. I was starting to get Wendell Berry's distrust of movements. So the way in which we know things can blind us. You know how exhilarating it is to discover a whole new body of knowledge, a great book you picked up, or just an amazing mentor you meet. It grabs your entire being. But a person may not even notice over time as their own attitude slips from, "Wow, that was amazing," in the direction of, "Now I've got it all figured out. Everyone should be this way." It becomes a kind of fundamentalism that can blind you and divide you from others. Religious fundamentalism comes first to mind. There are versions inside Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and probably every religion. But it's not only dividing those religions from each other, but inside of that religion become sparring factions. Political fundamentalism slows down the government. The corporate or industrial mindset is also a kind of fundamentalism when, in the words of Wendell Berry, quote, "We consider how often and how recently our most advanced experts have been wrong about the future, and how often the future has shown up sooner than expected with bad news about our past. We recognize it as our old friend hubris, ungodly ignorance disguised as godly arrogance." End quote. The industrial mindset is a kind of fundamentalism when it acts as if there are no limits to what science can know and business can deliver. No problems that technology can't solve. Well, there's also organic fundamentalism. The belief that organic philosophy covers every aspect of sustainable food, or it's the only way to farm responsibly. And the belief that all growers using conventional pesticides are not only making the wrong choice, but are morally wrong. I have no issue with this worldview at the farm level. I take issue with this mindset when it becomes our voice in the greater conversation about the future of food and agriculture, because it builds walls. It impedes dialogue between us and others. It greatly reduces the number of collaborators we can work with on large, important issues. I want to see organic's best ideas presented and understood as innovative farming solutions proven by experience and science, not dismissed as unrealistic or elitist or as ideology. The Wendell Berry quote about hubris is from the essay, The Way of Ignorance. But this idea that ignorance, not reckless, lazy ignorance, but ignorance that is aware of itself and knows what it does not know. This idea has been recommended by all sorts of teachers all the way back to Confucius. The way of ignorance is the way of long-termism. It's the way of listening, the way of humility, It's the only way out of the dividedness we experience today. It sheds light on how to be NOFA in the 21st century. It's what we'll wrestle with in the last part. Some of the region's most innovative and talented apple growers are right here in Vermont. Zeke Goodband of Scott Farm in Dummerston is a master heirloom apple grower, pioneer of ecological apple farming. Sunrise Orchard in Cornwall was the first New England orchard to plant semi-dwarf trees. The 200-acre orchard is run today by Barney and Chris Hodges. Bill Schur of Champlain Orchard in Shoreham combines organic vegetable production with a small amount of organic apple acreage and a large amount of IPM orchard in apples. In fact, I think we're eating some of Bill Schur's apples at this conference this weekend. All three of these growers are certified in Red Tomato's Eco Apple Fruit Program. Though they grow using advanced level IPM, or integrated pest management, which includes scouting, trapping, mating disruption, biological predators, ground cover management, and conservation measures, they also use synthetic pesticides. Therefore, their apples are not organic. And therefore, these apple growers didn't fit inside my own vision. Yet, among the apple growers I knew who were wholesaling and feeding tens of thousands of people when I started Red Tomato, these growers stood out for their ecological conscience and practices. So if Red Tomato was going to supply apples at all, these growers had to fit in. So what was wrong with my vision? My vision read like a checklist. Okay, it wasn't one single issue, as Wendell-Berry had warned against, but rather it had become a chain of them. It was more like a list of core values than a vision to guide the future. I thought of my blind spot. My vision had to have space for allies who saw things differently from how I did. That space I was craving is a function of our minds. It's the interior landscape of the brain. So let's go back to the neuroscience a minute. You are a feeling person who thinks, not a thinking person who feels. You, everyone in the room, is mastering your piece of the greater food effort: growing, cooking, manufacturing, medicine, policy making, or education. You found groups, community, that supports you and feeds your soul. And because of that success, you've also developed a blind spot or two of your own. You and I are passionate feeling creatures with specialized mastery, complete with blind spots and minds already made up. Now, imagine what happens when a statewide or a national event gets called and you fill an auditorium or you fill an entire building with a diverse group of passionate feeling creatures with specialized mastery, complete with blind spots and minds already made up. Well, what happens then? Typically, you get a lot of selective listening and people clustered in groups with others who tend to think the same way they do. My concern is precisely what happens when we go up the ladder of participation into the public arena. At the individual level, in our work lives, in our farms, in our organizational lives, below the line, it is utterly foolish to imagine anything other than each one of us staying right on course to be the highest capacity version of our genuine selves. But when you go up the ladder of participation to solve a problem, now you are creating the future of food and farming. For example, a problem like how uncertified growers farming organically should communicate to their inquiring customers. Or even more threatening problems like protecting honeybees and pollinators, or controlling new invasive insects, brown marmorated stink bug and spotted wing Drosophila, without returning to calendar spraying of harsh pyrethroids. Success up the ladder requires us, it calls on the collective capacity of all those present It asks you to keep one foot firmly planted in your current own reality, your home, your core beliefs, your farm, your organization, while planting the other foot in the collective future, the future that's calling out to be born. Yes, this means being present in two realities at the same time. This is the way of ignorance, the way of humility, openness, and listening. It takes practice, cultivating the interior landscape, your mind, with as much intention and care as some of you give the farm landscape. It's the only way we will uncover the common ground that can bring enough people together to create the innovations that impact the whole system. We are part of something bigger, bigger than organic, fair trade, and all the critical issues put together. This something bigger is the future food system emerging now. There's little that I know for certain about this system, but here's one thing. As our current system was made possible by cheap energy and externalized costs, the emerging system will be made possible by solutions that address the intolerable rising costs of energy, healthcare, and climate change. I don't necessarily see the agriculture of tomorrow as mostly certified organic as we define and know it today, but I know the emerging system has to be based on the organic fundamentals of building a healthy soil. Organic certification by necessity has shifted attention away from the soil building fundamentals in the direction of materials management, but it's played a central role in making organic a trusted and known symbol for most of the eating public. No small task. Frank Gunkelman would have hell to pay today for the fraud that he committed in 1983. Things are happening right now to motivate conventional growers to look beyond their conventional toolboxes. Fossil fuel-based fertilizers and pesticides are getting pricier and pricier. Drought is forcing more irrigation and worrying growers and the whole Department of Agriculture about scarce water resources. What a perfect opportunity to teach the relationship between organic matter content and water retention. Okay, let's take stock. Only 1% of U.S. farm and ranch land is managed today using organic methods, and I think that's the certified share. So the remaining 98 to 99% of U.S. farm and ranch land, depending on how you count the uncertified part, is managed by an undifferentiated group we lump together as conventional growers. We need to engage a small but growing subset of conventional growers who are adopting or showing interest in practices that we consider to be organic. These conventional growers are allies of organic, if we will have them. When I first met Zeke Goodband, I thought we were on opposite sides of a moral divide. He wasn't organic, and he had no intention to be. I spent one winter day trudging through high snow, following him and his brontosaurus-like Newfoundland through the orchard. I listened, he pruned. He talked about eastern orchard ecology. Organic, he said, works fine in the irrigated deserts of the West, but here in the humid East, it's a different story. Zeke had non-chemical tools in his toolbox for some of the worst insect pests, but for scab and other diseases, he didn't like the organic options, sulfur or copper, because they're harmful to earthworms and to small mammals. Zeke is an unconventional grower. In their 30-year history of organic, Garth Youngberg and Suzanne DeMuth write, organic adherents may have to accept the fact that other terms will be used to describe many of organic farming's long-standing agronomic methods and principles. The terms, the language, they really matter. And so I'm not putting a name on something bigger. this emerging food system. But I have worked to rewrite my vision and leave you with a different version that replaces the checklist version earlier. Food and farms that nourish us all, but at least do no harm. It's a sort of agro-Hippocratic oath. The words are plain and simple. They still have meaning. They haven't been turned into commodities yet. Okay, it's quiet in here, but I still hear the critics shouting, "Vanilla! It's too plain. It's too general. It's so simple it doesn't mean anything." But I don't accept that. I'm not here to sell you on these particular words, but these simple words honor the reader, the farmer, the eater, by not requiring her or him to be of any particular persuasion, and they insist that the person take responsibility for their role. The debate, a fierce debate, as it should be, will be around the meaning of the words nourish, harm, and all. A vision statement this general and simple is wide enough to include and welcome in large numbers and an uncommon diversity of people. It will take very large numbers, it will take diversity, and it will take collective strategy to create a national force strong enough to fight against the things that have no place inside this vision. Immigration policies that harm farm workers and undermine agriculture. Monopoly control of meat, poultry, dairy, and processed grains. Campaign finance rules that allow elections to be bought. The threatened extinction of public funding for research and cooperative extension, to name just a few. This kind of a vision makes a space where that collective capacity can be found and organized. So, on Monday, I head back to Plainville, Massachusetts, to the lovely landscape where Red Tomato now resides. There, I can be thoroughly groupish with my own team immersed in our winter agenda. But there will be meetings and conferences calling me and calling you to go up that ladder of participation, to practice our leadership skills, our listening skills, to practice the way of ignorance, and to work on the emerging future of food and farming for the state, the region, the nation. There's no better place to start practicing than right here, and there's no better time than right now. Let's have a great conference. Thank you.